Sounds like champagne.
Good afternoon. We're going to call the meeting of the advisory council, the zoning advisory council to order. Thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, we need to confirm a quorum. Actually, we don't need to confirm a quorum because we're not taking any votes today, but we'll still call roll. Yes, Marianne? Okay, great. Andrew Bunn. Riley Champagne.
Here.
Wayne Creedle. Benny Gates. Tiffany Gunn. Philip Hart.
Here.
Preston Lloyd.
Here.
Charlie Menges.
Here.
Jennifer Mullen. Casey Overton. Maritza Peachin. Melissa Savenko.
Here.
Charlie Wilson.
Here.
And we're not taking any votes today, so I don't even say there's a quorum, but we're going to go ahead and proceed with the agenda. Just a reminder that the Advisory Council is a subcommittee of the City Planning Commission. We're charged with advising the Planning Commission, the Department of Planning and Development Review, and the external consultants on the zoning ordinance process. The public will have an opportunity to speak during the public comment period at the beginning of the meeting. And as a reminder to SAC members, please speak up so our online listeners can hear us, and state your name when beginning your comments so those that are participating virtually know who is speaking. We do not, I think the agenda says we're going to approve February minute notes, but we don't have those, so we're going to skip over that portion of the agenda. Is there any questions from the SAC members before we open the public comment? Okay. At this time, we will open the public comment period. This is the opportunity for the general public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. We have a tight agenda, and the past couple meetings we've gone over on public comment. And so I'm going to hold us to the 30-minute time allotted on the agenda. So won't take if you're representing yourself individually, or 5 minutes if you're representing an organization, but let's just be mindful that we have that 30-minute period to take comment in person online. So with that, we'll open the public comment period, and if you want to go ahead and line up, you take the first person here at the podium. Just remember to announce your name before you offer your comment.
Oh, yes, I'm Frank Robinson. I'm from the Union Hill, Churchill area of the city, and I'm representing myself. Okay,
Welcome.
all right, is that okay?
That's perfect.
Covered all bases, okay. So I've attended a lot of these meetings, and usually there's somebody here from, the planning commission with lots of slides saying, well, the reason rent's gone up so much the past 5 years is because we've had this increase in change in demographics and more people fleeing Northern Virginia and coming down here to the peaceful, quiet, historic climes of Richmond. And they all of this is demographics that's changing things, right? But nobody's mentioned inflation. So at your convenience, but not now, when you go home, ask Siri, what did the purchasing value of $1 on January 1, 2025, compared to January 1, 2020. I just did this at the meter one more time before it came in. It takes $1.24, January 21, 2025, to January 1st, 2020, to buy what you could buy with $1 on January 1, 2020. And just for funds, I said, well, wait, we're in 2026. What's the difference between January 1, 2026 and January 1, 2020. And it's 26.26%. So inflation has had a lot to do with driving the cost of housing in the Richmond area, if not just about everything to do with it. And the plan, this revised zoning plan, which gives a lot of huge concessions to developers, is supposed to reverse this process so that housing is once again as cheap today as it was in 2020. And that just can't happen. It can't happen with this zoning plan, and it can't happen with any zoning plan. So I'm going to ask, again, representing myself, that that some concept of livability be restored to the zoning plan. Because if you have to, have a vehicle to get your children to school or to get to affordable shopping, you're not going to do that on the city buses. And nobody's in Richmond has come up with a plan yet to have these self-driving automobiles that are all over the San Francisco Bay Area. Place a lot more complicated to navigate than Richmond streets. So we're going to create islands of people who have nothing to do but homegrown businesses. And the two most popular homegrown businesses in my neighborhood are drug sales and prostitution. So, we're creating that kind of environment if we continue to move forward, and we're living in some sort of fantasy land if we think we're going to restore home prices to January 1, 2020. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Rich Sauser from the Bellevue neighborhood. I'm here today to speak about one specific aspect of the city's zoning proposal, the residential detached category C. In draft 2 of Code Refresh, the city had placed 13,800 parcels in this newly created category. Under current zoning, most of these are R5, minimum 50-foot wide lots. New definition is a radical change from the current designation. It doubles the potential development by reducing the minimum lot 25 feet. In addition, it allows greater lot coverage and lesser tree canopy than the other two RD categories. The disproportionate impacts of this proposed zoning are corroborated by the recently released Richmond development scenarios. The study found that RD A and B areas will have minimal impact, whereas most of the impact will be in RDC. Most of the changes in real estate markets don't happen overnight, but the analysis notes that RDC zones could see a dramatic change much more quickly. Combining the two development scenarios, lot subdivisions and construction of an additional house under the preservation bonus with an ADU, the study shows approximately 3% of lots changing every year. This is an outstanding 46% change during the average length of time a homeowner owns a house in Richmond, which is approximately 15.5 years. Therefore, based on the analysis of impacts, the proposed RDC zoning would be a considerable change to the character of these established neighborhoods, increases density, parking, environmental, and infrastructure issues. This disproportionate and selective zoning is not in accordance with the master plan, and therefore it should be recommended that this category be eliminated in the next draft. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Daniela White, and I am the president of the Fan District Association, and I'm coming today to share a few thoughts on the overall code refresh. Excuse me while I have to put on my glasses. First, I'd just really like to thank you all for the work on this complex and important effort. The Fan District Association has been actively engaged in the code refresh process, both individually and collectively, carefully analyzing its potential impacts on the Fan and other neighborhoods. We appreciate the opportunity to partner with you as this work moves forward. While we will be submitting a more detailed letter to the mayor and city council, I'd like to briefly highlight a few key points. First, we support the overall concept of zoning reform. However, we are concerned that potential unintended consequences have not been fully considered. Neighborhoods are central to residents' daily lives and are defining features of what makes Richmond so special. So we must carefully consider what's at stake for their long-term sustainability. Second, as we move forward, we encourage a deliberate and thoughtful approach. This includes evaluating long-term impacts of proposed changes. For example, MX3 zoning for religious institutions may appear to offer a pathway to increased affordable housing. However, market trends both locally and nationally suggest that these properties are often sold for other uses, which may limit their effectiveness as a housing solution. Third, while the Fan District Association supports density in the principle, Our neighborhood is already among the city's most dense, and given this, our primary concerns center on demolition and displacement protections and ensuring that existing communities are not adversely affected. Finally, we are concerned that there have been no comprehensive economic analysis of the proposed rezoning from RA to RM, RX, and MX in neighborhoods like the Fan. This type of analysis is critical to understanding potential impacts on housing costs, property values, and community stability. Thank you again for your time and consideration. We look forward to partnering with you guys going forward.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, thank you. I'm Knut Levine. I live in a community that is bounded by Floyd, Harvey, Plum, and Main Street in the Fan. Our first structures go back to 1832. We were zoned residential 6 today. In the draft 1, we were again residential 6. Draft 2, we're now mixed use 6. So we have some concerns about that. I'm not sure how or why our designation got changed from residential to mixed use. There are some implications on distances from other zones when a residential's not in a some area, typically 100 feet. So we're on the southern boundary of a residential district, the Fan. We realize that we're up against a mixed use to the south side of Main Street. But we're worried about, what potential impacts, especially going from up to MX4 across the street, will potentially do to a neighborhood that I think has been a success as far as walkability, a mix of residents and businesses. And so our community just wanted me to express that in front of the board here. Appreciate your
Thank you,
time.
sir. If there's anyone else that plans to offer comment, if you could go ahead and come up front, because we want to keep it moving. Welcome. Hi, good afternoon.
My name is Kevlin Casati. I live on Grace Street, and I want to remind us all that retrofits prevent displacement, protect affordable existing housing, and they protect trees. It is heartening to see planners and policymakers start talking about trees, sunlight, and soil again during Earth Month. And I'd like to remind us all that without trees, sunlight, and soil, we can't breathe, much less thrive. And that is why I ask that we maintain our current unbuilt lot restrictions. Because without these natural resources that allow all of our communities to thrive, we will have nothing. Thank you.
Afternoon.
Hey, how are you? I'm Kathy Hambrick. I'm of West Grace Street. And I only want to talk about one aspect today of the code refresh, which is nice that you allow community input and we as a group say thank you. In terms of the definition of family, we kind of had that in one, and we hadn't had that in the second version. And specifically with West Grace Street, what do you do when 9 college students want to get together and buy a house? What limits do you put in there? And the nice thing about code refresh is a lot of people have multi-generational families in their house. And some of us have kids that are just seem to be boomerangs. And so, they come back to live with us. So that's a good thing. And a number of people in West Grace have changed already their homes into 2 and 3 apartments within their home, maintained the original front door, but inside expanded it for family or for future use as they age, because they're trying to age in place. But what do you do when a family comes in? They have 4 kids, and their 4 kids have 4 kids, And then they have the original mother and father of each one of them. You could have potentially 30 people in a house. So I'm only asking this, there's a definition of family and a definition of how many right now it's 6 apartments per property. I think for West Grace, I guess there may be a couple people. West Grace back in 1975 was a renting house. Why? Because the train station was there and there was only one hotel. It was a need. So it became a rooming house. For me, in the 70s, I worked on West End Rescue Squad as a volunteer. So when you went into those houses, they were known as hellholes because you walked down the long hall and it'd be quiet and then doors would suddenly open behind you. And then in front of you, you didn't know whether you had a knife or a gun. You know, we just didn't know. And the police didn't want to go in there either. So we don't want to turn West Grace or Monument, but specifically West Grace, back into a rooming house. I think it would be prudent to have definition of family. You right now have 6 units. I would humbly offer maybe 3 or 4 to preserve the fan as it is. So you still accomplish what you want to do, but maybe not so extreme. So that way, you know, adding more families in there and having, you know, a family of 30 in a house or 6 college students is not going to increase the bottom line because we need more money. And it's not going to help with that. And you could potentially be shooting, as somebody said last month, shooting the golden goose. So I only would just humbly offer to address that, make it nice and clean so we don't have another rooming house. We actually keep the general idea of what we want to do, but do it right.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon.
Hey, my name's Ingrid Bannerwood. I live in District 1 near Libyan Grove. Well, I don't live there yet. I renovate the house, living in a rental on Bromley. I am one of those people who came from a much more chaotic city, so that I could retire here, be near family, but also it was feasible for us to retire here. I came from just south of Atlanta, in September. So I think I can speak to what chaotic development looks like and developing, running amok. And I can tell you that it's hurting the economy. Now, it's still, I mean, unbelievably good. I think if you put us in a cold place, it wouldn't be. But it's disruptive to all facets of a person's life. And I can tell you, going to the grocery store, it's a completely different experience than it is going to a grocery store here. Everybody is stressed. So at any rate, I think I've seen a lot of this chaotic development and lack of consideration for cars, parking, safety, and overcrowded schools. So I'm really not quite sure why what we're seeing is being proposed. It is so different from Richmond 300. I had to be reminded of the number because, like I said, I'm new here. But I did look at the summary, and it is so different from Richmond 300. So I'm not even sure why we're here talking about a number of these issues. But so we are. And the number one thing that you've heard time and again is preserve single family housing on lots. Time and again. Because what does that mean to people? That means neighborhoods. That means people that you know. That means parking opportunities. That means less traffic. That means more air, more sunshine. But you're going to have to put those people somewhere. I'm not opposed to living in an integrated community. I've had a couple of people say to me, well, change is hard, which was a little amusing because I've put through change. I moved from Atlanta just 9 months ago. I have lived in a very integrated community. And I had delightful friends from all walks of life. But I don't think that's what's going to happen in my neighborhood. Because on the way to harming our neighborhood, it just simply doesn't make sense. And I think that the people who are falling for this are being scammed. Because you're either counting on the price of my house drastically going down. So thank you for that. Or you're counting on the houses being sold well above affordability. And I've participated in an affordability project. It does not happen this way. So thank you for letting me speak. I am very disappointed, but I think that I'm hoping very much you'll listen to the comments, and there's still opportunity for changing it, right? Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Earthy Hearn, 1608 West Grace. I'm the third person from West Grace to speak, but my focus is a little bit different. I'm absolutely zeroed in on the height of West Broad Street, right behind our houses. There is a 14-foot alley, which is about as wide as from this part of the table to this side behind my house. And right now, it's proposed to be, to allow 6-story buildings right behind my house across that 14-foot alley. That's from Lombardy to Strawberry, and from Strawberry to Arthur Ashe, it's 5 stories. And what we have in the post-Carter plan is something we agreed on with the city when that plan was being developed. We are 2, maybe 3-story houses on West Grace. And we agreed to a compromise with the city that we would not oppose 4-story buildings from Lombardy, Strawberry, 5 stories from Strawberry to Arthur Ashe, because the alley is wider there. It's a 20-foot alley. And so even though I don't really want a 4-story building right behind my house, we're willing to compromise because we know growth has to come and people need to live. But I think what I would like to see is our 8-block long neighborhood treated like an older historic district with the same limitations that we had in Code Refresh. And I don't see why that would be so onerous. I know developers can figure it out, that if they want to put in some kind of building, you know, in really a historic area. We used to have, I forget what it was called, but that part of Broad Street did have a special designation because of the old buildings there. So that's what I'm asking for again. It's just the limit of 4 stories, Lombardy to Strawberry, and 5 stories, Strawberry to Arthur Ashe. And I also appreciate all the work you all are doing on this. I know it takes up a lot of time and a lot of thought. And there are a lot of very knowledgeable people here. I realize when I'm listening to the comments and questions and conversations. So if you will just please keep Grace Street in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam, you want to come forward?
Okay,
Do you have comments?
okay.
Hi, good afternoon.
Yes, my name is Barbara Terry. I'm in the East End, in Epain Square behind Henry Marsh School. And I rather read mine because my nerves are shot. Okay? Okay, dear members of the zoning committee, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Barbara Terry, a longtime resident of our community, and I am writing to share my serious concerns about recent changes affecting our neighborhood, especially regarding the enforcement of laws and regulations tied to special use permits. For 47 years, I have depended on local codes that protected residents from discrimination and promoted fair living conditions. Recently, I received a letter from a corporation seeking to bypass these laws, which has caused me and many others great concerns. The construction of larger homes in our neighborhood has significantly altered our landscape, obstructing my view from the property line. And I'm saying that because the house they built beside me, they didn't get a special use permit in the beginning. And the house is on top of my house. I'm a rancher. They built a tall 2-story. The house style fits the theme of Churchill neighborhood, but it does not fit the theme of my particular area. I cannot get solar or anything like that because it actually, I was like 100% because the way my house was situated, no trees, no nothing. That house have actually dominated everything. It has shattered me. They have a gas tank, they have a gas line put in at the new house, but it's only electric houses there. It's 2 feet from my fence. It's that gas line, so gas piece is 2 feet from my house. Let me continue. Additionally, I noticed water drainage issues towards my property because they got the water drainage set up. Because I thought all this stuff was supposed to be thought out first. It's actually aimed at my property, not to the street, not to the back, but to my property. So it's gonna flood it's gonna give me water damage immediately. And also the way they landscaped it, the way they they graded the yard. It's graded like this on an angle coming to my house. So all of those things should have been addressed in the beginning when they started the building permits and all of that. Another thing, building permit is not on those houses. They're multi-use houses. It was supposed to be 3 of them. It's not enough room for the 3rd house, which requires 50 feet for a single dwelling. They put the multifamily house up first. I think they were being smart. They call themselves being smart because they didn't require that 50 feet thing because they're right next to each other. And the way they started this whole thing, they had a rooming house, because I heard somebody talking about rooming houses. They had a rooming house across the street. They took a rancher, they bought a rancher and turned it into a rooming house and put about 6 or 7 people in that. You know, so all of this stuff leading up to where we at today with my situation. It's disheartening to see a corporation dismiss our existing rules, replacing single-family homes with multiple units. This move could inflate property value for, that's me? I got to stop
You
you.
could just wrap up, please.
Huh?
You could just wrap up, please.
We'll wrap up,
Yes,
please.
please.
Okay, this move could inflate property values for investors, reduce housing affordability, and force the long-term residents out of their homes, which is me. My taxes went up $497. Such actions threaten the fabric of our community and undermines residents' rights. I urge the city to act swiftly to address these issues. We must ensure all development comply with our policies, safeguarding residents' rights and preserving our neighborhood's integrity. Thank you for your time and consideration. I look forward to your prompt response and resolution that respect our community value. I won't go into the pictures and the other stuff, but I did have more. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right.
Anyone else would like to offer comment? We only have about 6 minutes left for the public comment period, and I do want to get to some of the folks online. Okay. For the folks listening online, we're going to go ahead and open public comment, but we have 6 minutes left. So please offer your comments quickly. Mary Ann? Robert Franklin. Robert Franklin, if you want to unmute, you can offer comment at this time.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your time. My name's Robbie Franklin. I'm a resident of the 7th District, but am calling today as a member of the Southside Community Development Housing Corporation as an affordable housing professional and the Homes for All Our Neighbors Coalition. And I'm calling today in support of zoning refresh and our affordable duplex proposal, which would add by right duplexes in any single family district, as long as that duplex is restricted to 1,500 square feet each. And I'm in support of each of these things because it provides neighborhoods, their residents, and housing professionals 2 things, and that's another tool in our pocket that can help us create new affordable housing opportunities, and a tool in our pocket to help combat displacement. A recent study by Richmond Moore Health Foundation showed that there are 0 census tracts in the city of Richmond that have naturally occurring affordable housing that are affordable to 80% AMI buyers or below, typically a lower moderate income buyer. And 60% of Richmond's land is reserved for single-family housing, when duplexes and triplexes would fit very naturally in the majority of these neighborhoods. As a housing professional myself, I'm often restricted to by going through the special use permitting process, which is costly and is a 4 to 6 month planning process for a project that we are working on, often in collaboration with neighborhoods and community members. These are truthfully, zoning refresh provides opportunities for housing professionals and neighborhood organizations to create new home purchase opportunities for first time and first generation buyers. So I'll leave it at that because I know there's folks behind me, but thank you for your time.
Thank you. Jackson Miller. Jackson Miller, you want to unmute and offer comments?
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Fun. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I wanted to comment in support of the code refresh. The code refresh is essential to meet Richmond's goals of affordability and climate action that get espoused every election cycle. It's really well established by the data-based research and expert consensus, along with real-world examples, that boosting housing supply reduces housing price inflation. Our current zoning is the biggest thing standing in the way of more available homes, and the code refresh would unlock a lot of housing, and that's really important so the city can meet its goals. So I would also want to say that the code refresh is the most essential piece of climate action the city can take. So cars are roughly 20% of American emissions, and transportation is the biggest climate issue that the city can directly affect. As such, I think we should allow as much housing on our public transit lines as possible, especially Broad Street. I live just off Broad Street. I live on Park, and I am a living example. I've been able to get rid of my car, and I ride the Pulse. So unfortunately, there aren't as many housing options on Broad Street right now as there could be. So limiting housing on Broad Street is an action that directly results in more emissions by reducing the number of people who can use public transit. Even outside Broad Streets, climate experts largely agree that denser housing reduces emissions by reducing commute times by car. Additionally, the purported concern for urban trees and grass fails to consider that restricting housing in Richmond results in more sprawl into actual forest and farmland in places like Goochland. Third, I'd just say that infill housing will increase Richmond's tax revenues by raising more property taxes without demanding much new infrastructure in the way of electric lines, sewers, and roads. And finally, I want to finish up with a concern. I'm concerned that the average city resident isn't being considered, and that the code refresh is being watered down to appease a wealthy minority. Professional surveys show a large majority of Richmonders support more housing even in their neighborhoods. However, the city has received a wildly disproportionate amount of negative feedback from older, wealthy property owners who benefit from arbitrary supply restrictions. When I go to these city meetings, I see they're filled with older white property owners, despite the city being majority young, majority minority, and majority renter. The permitted number of homes near downtown Manchester and Broad Street were largely reduced from the first draft to the second draft. And this really plays into what my jaded peers are telling me, that elected officials talk a big talk, but they'll always cave to the wealthy and connected. So my peers aren't even reaching out anymore because they're just jaded and radicalized by being stuffed into single family homes in their parents' basements because they can't afford housing. And they just see the city not taking the steps that would be needed to increase the amount of housing, and like doing things like prioritizing the growth rate of ornamental plants in millionaires' back gardens instead of transit-oriented development. So I would urge the city to at least reverse the changes made between draft 1 and draft 2 that would limit housing, especially on transit and in downtown and Manchester. I also think the city should expand legalization of small apartments and townhomes in more areas, and should look to implement the duplex proposal made by Homes for All Our Neighbors. I talked pretty fast, but I did that because we're running out of time. So that's my thoughts. Thanks for having me.
This time we're going to close the public comment period. We've reached that end of that time allotted on our agenda. We have a lot to get through. If you did not have the chance to offer your comments, you can submit them online at richmond300@rva, or you can email them to richmond300@rva.gov. So is there any questions before we move to the council recap and meeting introduction? Thanks, Marianne.
Good afternoon, Mary Ann Pitts with the Planning Department. At our last meeting, the council reviewed the development standards and had the opportunity to provide comments on those. As you know, the last time you reviewed the development standards, some of those comments were not incorporated before they were presented as a part of draft 2. So it might have felt like you were repeating some of those comments. So we're going to take back those comments and also take the comments that we received from the public as we work on making those changes. That'll be part of draft 3. We're also presented with the development scenario. So you got a very brief presentation from Kyle Talenti on those development scenarios. He will be joining us again today and we have about an hour allotted and may not take that amount of time to answer any questions. I prepared him with some of the questions. Thank you, Melissa, for sending a lot of great questions to prep him. Getting into some of the details of the development scenarios. If you want a copy, I have a few extra copies of his presentation, but we'll be getting into those details. Today, you also have a copy at your desk of a map that zooms in a little bit more so you can see what the different areas of the sub areas are and the zoning in the sub areas as well. After the conversation with Kyle, we'll be joined by Tara Warden, who's with our Office of Sustainability. One of the items that we kind of ended with the development standards last time was the tree canopy requirement. And we've been working closely with the Office of Sustainability on those tree canopy requirements. And so Tara's going to share some information about how their office helped come up with those requirements and her thoughts on those, but leaving a lot of time for discussion and questions from you all regarding those requirements. So that is what we're going to do today. I know in the future, Elizabeth and I have talked about at the next meeting coming more with a more comprehensive timeline about the work of the advisory council. So at the next meeting, we'll be able to provide some more information for you all about that as well.
Does anyone have any questions for Marianne? I'm just gonna kind of tag on. You mentioned the comments received by Melissa Savenko on the development scenario analysis, and one of them you raised at the last meeting was expanding that to some additional areas. Will that occur? Is that within the scope of the consultant's work to do additional analysis into other areas?
Yes, we have been in conversation with the consultant team about expanding their work.
Okay. Melissa, if you don't mind, could you just maybe, for the audience purposes, reiterate the zones that you inquired about? Because you also brought it up last meeting. If you remember.
Yeah, my question was, is there going to be an economic analysis of the upzoning from RA, which is residential attached, to RM, RX, and MX? Because there are areas that are effectively RA, on the ground today, that in version 2 are upzoned to one of those higher level densities.
Great. Just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of the question that you raised and the potential for additional analysis. Thank you.
We are in discussions with the consultant team about what other potential analysis Kyle can work on.
There, any other FDAC members have any other questions of Marianne before we move over to the consultants? All right. Thank you, Marianne. Okay, Kyle, are you online? Can you hear us?
I sure can. Can you hear me?
Welcome, Kyle Talenti. If you want to go ahead and jump into, did I say your last name right? You kind of chuckled, sorry.
Close enough. I've been
great.
called worse.
I apologize.
That's
So
okay.
welcome, and I know you're joining us to talk about the development scenario analysis. Did you have a presentation or are we just having Q&A? How did you want to kick this off?
No, I have, I'm happy to respond to the questions that I received, and we can kind of start there. And if there's additional questions, I'm happy to respond to them.
That'd be great. Go ahead and kick us off.
Okay. Great. And so one of the first questions was around the boundaries that were used for the study. I believe, if I heard Marianne correctly, that you have the map that we created to kind of help identify more clearly what those 6 areas are, and then overlaid RA, RB, RC. You can see how they interact with the different sub areas. But the questions that we received in addition to a more clear map, if you will, was how did we come up with those and what were they trying to do? And the short answer to that is within the city of Richmond, markets behave differently. And to try and model the city as a single area and use an average across all of Richmond, we thought was not going to do a service to truly understand the potential impacts based on different where you are located within Richmond. And so those 6 sub areas were a compromise, to be very frank, around trying to get to a level of specificity that identified some of the larger nuance within the residential housing market in Richmond, but also do it in a manner that was efficient, right? And because obviously it's not just 6 areas, prices don't only vary by those 6 areas, but general real estate behaviors and housing makeup and development intensities are similar and similar enough in these areas that our analysis gave us what we believe to be a fairly confident result in terms of what we think would likely happen within RARBRC within these different 6 submarkets. There was a follow-up question to that around why didn't we use like real estate parameter boundaries? We looked at all sorts of different factors. We looked at socioeconomic factors. We looked at existing development factors. We looked at market like rent rates, sale prices, size of lots, size of houses, stuff like that. And these kind of laid down where we thought there was enough similarity to try and do the analysis. And so this wasn't to be a slight of other methods and metrics that exist within Richmond, but it was our attempt based on current market information, our analysis to try to be as clear as we could in terms of potential impacts based on the different realities of markets within the city of Richmond. So that was kind of the first set of questions. The next question, and forgive me if I read this wrong, was around how do the different questions respond to an owner who wants to do this, either to split a lot or to build additional units on their property, or a landlord where an investor would come in and they would not occupy any of the 3 units there and would be either renting out or selling each of those units individually. Question 1 is around splitting the lot side to side, which if you all remember from the presentation, or if you want to finger through, you can see there's very few properties that would even qualify to be able to do that, let alone to create value. And so that kind of just looked at it from that perspective, but really is questions 2 really focused in on an investor perspective, is where someone comes in and would buy the property and either build the additional units behind or whether they turn them into rentals or individual sale units. And question 4 really focused in on the existing owner occupant or an owner occupant purchasing the property to live in one of the units and then build it. And just to remind everybody is that based on the financial analysis, there really wasn't a terrible difference between whether it would be an investor who did it and it would make financial sense for them to go in and buy those properties to take advantage of the zoning change, or whether it was an owner occupant that would do it because it creates a financial benefit to them. The one caveat to that I wanted to make sure everyone is clear is, while the analysis kind of looked at it from a math perspective, we also recognize the fact that the owner occupant probably would have other non-financial considerations that might make them less likely to do it than an investor, particularly if you're going to be living in one of the units, is, for example, you're going to have to carve off some, most, or all of your backyard, for example, to do a front and back kind of development that used to be space that you used that you no longer would have access to or availability to. And so while the financial data that we showed in the presentation showed what likely would happen if people just did it through a financial decision, we also recognize that there is non-financial economic options, and the investor, which is question 2, would be less likely to be impacted by that, obviously, because they're not living there. But we just wanted to show if people are making a decision based on a financial perspective, what the likely rate of change would be and what the likely maximum penetration based on their current market understanding and market assumptions. On the flip side of that coin, the owner occupant may be more apt to do it, even if it doesn't make financial sense, because, for example, they're building an additional unit for a parent or for a child, or they want to stay living in the neighborhood. They don't want to maintain a big house. And so they want to build the accessory unit to live there and then rent out or have their, in my fantasy, their adult children with their own children live in the main unit. And so there are other non-financial factors that impact it, but we wanted to look at it from a perspective of, if you're looking at it from a dollars a cents, what is the incentive for someone, whether it be an investor or whether it be a existing owner occupant or a prospective owner occupant to do it? Do you want me to pause and take the question, or do you want me to go through all the list of questions I have and then come back? I'm good. Someone has their hand raised.
That's not a member of the ZAC.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
Anyone on the ZAC have any questions at this point? Okay, you can keep going.
Okay, thank you. The next question that I received was, do we have any data on the breakdown between owner occupied and renter for each in the RDA, RDB, RDC? The answer is no, and there's a couple of challenges to it. The primary way that you would do it en masse within these districts would be to compare within the property assessment data the mailing address of the property and compare it to the mailing address of the owner. And while that generally could give you a sense, there's a number of there's a number of different situations that would skew that data. Sometimes owners put their owner occupants put their homes in a trust, and that trust has a separate address. Sometimes they would rather use a PO box than the physical address of the property, and so that would skew the information. And sometimes there are landlords that still have official mail from the municipality sent to the address, which is their choice. That's not as common, but it does happen. And so the challenge of trying to do that kind of analysis would be hard from the perspective of trying to nail down a number. That in theory can be done, but I think where the person who asked the question was going is it more likely that in RDA there are fewer conversions to rentals than in B, and then fewer in B than in C? And our analysis indicates that's an accurate assumption. What those actual numbers are impossible for us to nail down to a accurate number. But I think that from a perspective, there is more, just because of the location where most of those units are within the city and how those different markets perform. I think there's some validity to that. That being said, and I like to take the long way around to the answer that I'm trying to give, unfortunately for you, is that whether it is currently renter occupied or currently owner occupied, the analysis is indifferent because it's looking at what type of value does it create based under the new policy versus the value that it has today. And the current values are reflective of the existing tenure within the property. The next question was lot coverage requirements a consideration? And they absolutely were. Code Studios calculated based off of the requirements that they are proposing for RDA, RDB, RDC of what the minimum lot size would be to be able to take advantage of these different policy strategies. We were able to take those numbers and compare them against the existing size of all the parcels in RDA, RDB, RDC to determine ones that could even do this, whether or not it made financial sense. And that was the baseline in which that we used was, did the parcel already have enough square footage of land to be able to accommodate this? And so that was absolutely a component of the analysis that we did for the sublot creation. The next question was a similar situation. was the source of information, reasoning behind regarding minimal practical lot size, dwelling size example, et cetera, excuse me. On the minimum practical lot size is exactly what I just said, which was we calculated, well, I shouldn't say we, I'm trying to steal Co-Studio's effort, but Co-Studios calculated that and gave us those numbers, and we were able to then discern the lots that would qualify. In terms of the dwelling size, is we took a look, we look within RA, RDA, RDB, RDC of what existing property or existing building sizes are, and looked at this kind of scale, and we simulated, and you can see that in the numbers in our presentation from last time, we simulated different size full units, and then we capped the accessory dwelling units at 1,000 square feet, regardless of which zone it was in, just to try and be consistent with what exists within those communities. And so can a property where an existing structure being 1,500 square feet, if they have enough land, do a 2,500 square foot unit? Yes, in theory, that can happen, but it is not practical and frankly not really possible for us to go parcel by parcel and try and math out exactly what the largest size home could be added or largest size structure could be added to that property, especially since it's also going to be based on the desire of the existing owner or the investor, the market. And so that's why we kind of looked at it and said, okay, we're going to scale what those new builds on those sublots will be based on the consistency with the community where it exists. And then the final question that I received that we responded to, once again, reflected back on the difference between an existing homeowner occupant or a prospective homeowner occupant or a traditional or like a more traditional investor that would come in and look at and for our analysis. And like I said, that was the differentiation largely between questions 2 and questions 4, was trying to understand who is likely going to be the occupant there, which then obviously affects the financials of the investment because an owner occupant, you're obviously not generating revenue off of the unit that you're occupying, as opposed to an investor where they're generating revenue off of all 2 or 3, depending upon the scenario. So those were the questions that I received that we provided some responses to. I'm happy to answer any other questions about what we shared last time if there are additional ones.
Al, anyone from the ZAC have questions? Melissa?
This is Melissa Savinko. I still would love to see the geographic boundaries like provided. I mean, I've got a map, but I cannot tell what streets they are and things like that. So in terms of the 6 different sub areas. So again, I just would like to understand that because, I mean, it looks like places we go back and forth across the river and include south side and north side neighborhoods together. And I'm trying to figure out the rationale. And I understand that there was a rationale, but I think I can't really do that until I know what those street boundaries are.
I'll pose this to Kyle and to Marianne from staff. Is this available in a clickable map where we could drill down a little deeper and see the boundaries?
There are, well, I'll respond from my perspective and then Marianne can respond. We have a GIS shapefile that has these boundaries that I'll be happy to provide to the city that they could upload onto their GIS, in which that then can layer over the existing city shapefiles on their online portal. And so they could make it searchable in that regard, or at least in theory they can. I'm not going to speak for them, but I have this in a GIS file that can be synced in with other GIS files. And for example, through the online portal. So that's what I can do for you all. So in theory, yes, it can happen. And then, Marianne or whoever from the city, if that's even possible.
Make it available. Okay, we'll figure it out. Great. Thank you. Marianne, if you didn't hear that, Kyle said that if you provide the shape files that they will figure it out and make it available.
Sounds great.
Yes, Charlie.
Yeah, this is Charlie Mays. I should know this, I guess, but this map that we have that shows kind of reddish, tannish, bluish area. Uh, they are the current residential detached zoning districts, or have they shrunk from what the current ones are?
I'm gonna, just to be safe, Kyle, did you hear that question? I'm gonna let you
I
respond.
did, I did hear the question, and I'm going to punt to Colin because I think he probably has a better answer of that than I do.
Yeah, they should be. So those should represent the current proposed RD districts.
Which are less than districts currently. Fewer property. Current zoning.
This is the proposed, yeah, this is not the current zoning system at all,
This is
which
not
has
current,
different
yeah.
nomenclature, yeah. And yeah, generally speaking, there is a little bit less detached zoning proposed than there is today, slightly.
I'm Charlie Wilson. I'm aware of at least some areas on here that today with R6 zoning, you could do attached dwellings by right. But with this draft 2 map that we're looking at, they've to an extent been downzoned to residential detached.
That's correct. That's a conversation that we've had with staff and other people where they felt like there was a feeling that certain areas were probably overzoned before, for maybe historic political reasons, and certain areas, even though they were completely, composed of detached houses, had the permission to do attached in them. So there was a certain amount of, you could call it downzoning, but again, we're also allowing,
Right.
Additional units per property. So
Yeah, that was lack of a better word situation, but yeah, I guess it's something I wanted to talk about too, just projecting more than asking at this point, but like Highland Park in particular, it's it's my neighborhood, right? Councilman Robertson's neighborhood too, and today there are large swaths that are R6 and they currently have pretty grand Victorian homes that are large in scale. Many of them are in disrepair, many have been saved, et cetera. There's vacant lots available too. And I wouldn't say that within the R6 zoning that is currently on the books, we've seen like an onslaught of demolitions for purposes of building single family attached dwellings in a market that could command that, right? I would describe a lot of that area as gentrifying. And there's areas off of Brooklyn Park too, as well, like Barton Heights, et cetera, that are currently R6 that would allow for the more marketable single family attached housing to get built by right today. Demolish the house, you could do that today with the current zoning. And here we have not a down zoning, but a different zoning, right? Where it's RDC, which would, based on this economic analysis that we've seen, confirm that you might even see less change than you could see today for that. But what I would assume, I'm not a realtor, but I would assume that single family for sale housing is like a hot commodity right now, right? And so if you're not seeing it today in some of these neighborhoods, I do wonder, especially seeing this economic feedback from a person who is an expert in that. I wonder if the fear in residential neighborhoods, knowing again, with the current zoning, we don't have like this apocalyptic scenario happening, right? Where you could, wondering if this new zoning will be as feared, I guess, in the residential context. So again, projecting, I'm satisfied to see this data. I know it's not something that's easy to generate, so.
Yes, please.
Yeah, this is Philip Hart. I have a question for the consultant and probably have a follow-up question. But on page 8, this has to do with the building size assumptions. On page 8 is our new principal structures, RDA, B, and C, and we see the numbers there. Where do those numbers come from? And can you explain, yes, the 2,500, the 2,000, and the 1,500? Where do they come from, and how do they fit into the math that really creates the output of your conclusions here?
Sorry, I muted myself and then I forgot to mute myself. A rookie mistake. Those numbers reflect averages under the new proposed zoning boundaries. And so RDA existing housing structures tend to be larger than in RDB, and those tend to be larger than RDC. And so we needed to use a number in our analysis to be able to calculate what the new value would be. If, for example, you're building a new principal structure for sale, and the average sale price is $300 or $200 a square foot or whatever it is, the size of the unit matters in terms of what value it creates. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to try and reflect a number that was consistent with the existing zoning districts that we were mathing. And so we didn't want to, for example, say, oh, in RDC, you're going to see a bunch of 2,500 unit structures because in RDC, there aren't a lot of 2,500 unit structures now. And so we were trying to be respectful of the existing development climate, or that's probably not the right word that I would want to use, but the character, maybe that's a better term, of those areas by using units that would be consistent in size, not too small, not too large. And how it affects the numbers is purely around generating what the cost of the development is. There's a cost per square foot for housing, and then there's a revenue, whether you sell it in a sale price per square foot or rental price per square foot. And as you change the size of the unit, that affects what the resulting numbers would be, which then affects its comparison between how it sits today and how it would sit under the different scenarios that we ran. And
Right,
as I mentioned, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, finish, please.
The last thing I was going to say, and as you see on the slide for the ADUs, because if you remember the proposed policy is one new principal structure and one ADU, they were capped. Which is written into the code, and so that's why that third unit, if you will, would be smaller regardless of where it was located.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, here's my follow-up question. So, and thank you for that explanation. It makes perfectly good sense. But if your numbers here, you've come to the penultimate conclusion in this study that what's proposed is not going to result in much more development in RDA or RDB. And most of it's going to be impacting RDC, which of course is going to drive property values and taxes and all of that. But I'm wondering about RDA and RDB. I live in an RDA area, and I can imagine that if our lot were split in half, what would be built by developer would be much larger than 2,500. So I suppose my point is, if these numbers are low, okay, then you are underestimating by the math you're employing, you're underestimating the potential development pressure on RD A and B. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. If I bumped up the RDA number to 3,500 square feet, yes, that would change the math, and you would likely see more pressure where you would create greater value, which would then provide more financial incentive than we have baked into our analysis.
Okay, and then sort of my final follow-up, and the equation uses, this is on page 7, uses current market value, okay? And I get it, doing a study and you have a snapshot, but what we're really, what we're talking about is how this is going to play out over time. And so current market value, today's value, but once there is an added development potential for lots, because you can split them in half or whatever, that's going to impact, I would think, the market value of those properties. So that's going to impact your output as well over time.
Yes.
And you can probably do a better job than I can in sort of explaining how that might play out over time if your number one current market value actually is increasing because of development potential.
If you wouldn't mind switching to slide 9 on the screen, please. Thank you. And so that is exactly what we measured. is what would be the new value of that property given the change in zoning where I'd be allowed to split the lot or be allowed to add one or two new units onto the lot. That is exactly the crux of our analysis. And so when we said, all right, what is the current market value of the site? And then what would be the new value based on what you'd be allowed to do with that site under this new current zoning? And that's how we looked at what the likely overall potential penetration rate would be. Meaning if everyone whose lot was, who they created greater value than it is today, took advantage of it at some point in time, what that number is, and then what would be the pace of that investment based on the difference between the new value that's created by allowing this development and the existing value that you already have. And you can see on the bottom of this slide, an example, if there is a house that has a current market value of $300,000, and the rezoning created a value that would make it worth $450,000 to either someone else to come and buy it, or for that owner to execute what they're allowed to do and then reap the benefits of that value at some point in time in the future, that weighed into the pace at which that change would occur. And the greater difference between the new value and the existing value affected the potential annual rate of change or the pace that it would happen. Because if your house was worth, and I'm making up a number, $300,000, and under the code it was worth $600,000, and I showed up tomorrow and knocked on your door and said, hey, I'll give you $600,000 if you sell me your house in the next 30 days, you're more likely to take advantage of that than if I showed up and said, I'll give you $500,000, and less likely if I said $400,000, and highly unlikely at all if I said, I'll just give you the $300,000 that it's worth. And you say, hey, look, I live here. This is my community. This is where I work. Or I'm near my, whatever your reasoning is, that is what affects the annual rate of change. If you would indulge me for just one more minute, and if you would slip to slide 18, I can give you the example in RDB of what I'm talking about. That very first line up there, the annual rate of change calculates that above value or at approximately 20% above value, approximately 40% above value, or more than 40% above value, what the total number of parcels that meet those different thresholds, and then that annual rate of change translates into about 134 parcels a year based on how much value it does create for those various owners, which would be about a 0.5% a year of all the parcels in RDB that would potentially convert. However, the next number is if every single parcel that is now worth more than it was beforehand gets converted over, it would be a total of 27% of the parcels that are currently in RDB. And so your question is exactly what we modeled. Like I said, I take the long way to the answer.
Okay.
But hopefully that explains it a little bit better about what you're looking at in this data.
It does. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That answer your questions, Philip?
Yeah. Yes.
There are additional questions?
And this is Andrew Bunn, and I hope I phrase this the right way because I'm still kind of mulling over it, but a lot of this seems driven by market analysis and value increasing over time. And as somebody who cares about affordability a lot, I think what the affordability hope to see in the market would be for housing prices to decrease or at least slow down their increase dramatically. And I think many people see an increase in housing stock to be one strategy to make that happen. As housing stock increases and value increase potentially slows down, would you expect that the pressures that are being measured here to decrease and these rates of change to decrease even further from their already pretty small values?
I don't think so. I think that because it works both ways as these investments and you see proof of concept And as the market continues to grow and demand continues to change, this alone isn't going to reverse the balance of supply and demand within the city of Richmond. Maybe that's the better way of answering the question. This is one of many tools that I believe are being considered through this process that could help create more housing in areas rather than continue to try to expand or full on redevelop. And then also the accessory dwelling unit max at 1,000 square feet also creates more smaller units that are going to be limited in what their revenue will be just because of the size of the unit compared to others. And so I don't believe that as this happens, it's going to be enough of new development to reverse value and appreciation. And as a result, I don't think this is overstating the number. If I'm understanding your question, it's like in long term, could this actually go down because by adding more supply, you're going to reduce the price of housing? And I don't think that this policy would reverse that path. I guess that's my answer.
Actually, I would like to add then. So my takeaway from this is that it feels like the rates of change that we're talking about are so minor that additional like hedging around and dealing with details of this feels like significant diminishing returns. It feels like we're talking about really, really minor changes in overall development patterns and character of neighborhoods and things like that, especially for the teardowns. The teardown analysis seems like we're getting severely diminishing returns on analysis past this point, because this seems like it incorporated the major variable. So that's kind of what I'm taking away. That's all I wanted to add to it.
Thank you. That is also Maureen Sapichen. That is also my takeaway.
There's this is Elizabeth, a lot of nodding heads here, sharing that same feeling. Andrew, thank you. Yes, Charlie.
I just have are you the only realtor? Can I just pick your brain really quick?
Yeah.
If like, I get it, like we're not gonna, even if we wanted to, even if we tried to, I'm not sure we're gonna fix everything in Richmond by virtue of this exercise, but from like a home buying perspective, if there were, I'm just looking at the flexible solutions in RDA, RDB, and RDC, 134, 158. Let's just say roughly 300, just round up. We'll round up to 300. If over the course of the year, there were 300 more dwellings to purchase, what does that do? Because like at any given moment, over the course of time, there's only going to be like a select amount of buyers or prospective buyers, right? Like this isn't going to generate more buyers necessarily. The buyers exist and then they respond to market conditions. If theoretically under that market condition, there were 300 more things available to buy, I would think that things like escalation clauses and bidding wars are statistically less likely to happen, right? And that might, at least to some degree, like relieve some pressure. Whether it cures the affordability problem, like probably not, right? But I would assume that people having more choice to buy a house and there being slightly more houses to buy, like would help. I don't know. What are your thoughts there? Because I don't really know.
I think 300 additional houses a year is immaterial. I mean, I think at the end of the day, you have to analyze not just what is the static demand from inside the market now, but what are we getting from inflow? You know, we are getting a significant amount of people who move here, mostly from higher cost of living markets, DC, New York, Austin. I don't know why we have become an Austin pipeline. And a lot of those people are able to buy at a higher price point than the average Richmonder. Like the average, I think the median income for a Richmonder is $65,000. So you could buy basically like a $200,000 to $250,000 house. Obviously, that depends on interest rate and credit worthiness and amount of down payment and a lot of other things. To me, the thing that we never talk about here that I find frustrating is there's a problem we need to solve that this doesn't do. We need more starter homes. That's what we need. There's going to be plenty more 400, 600, 800 million dollar homes, and there are plenty of people to buy them. What we don't have is homes for somebody making the median income in Richmond, Virginia to buy. The only way you get there is less dirt, because dirt costs you money, and your construction costs are what they are. So it needs to be a smaller house on a smaller lot. So I have been frustrated because I'm not really sure why we are not talking about more RC zoning, which would force that.
We did,
More
Sorry.
RC, so more blue on that map.
No, RC, residential cottage.
Cottage, I see it.
Residential cottage. I've been told that RC is only being used for mobile homes. And that just seems like a big miss to me.
if you go back to Charlie Wilson again, if you go back, I don't know, a year and a half, it was early in this exercise. We did talk about things like maximum unit sizes in certain cases. We have talked about it, and slowly the cake gets baked, and here we are. But it's not something that we've just forgotten to think about. It was before you joined, but and it was a while ago too. But it is something that we did talk about.
But to answer your question, I think 300 houses, number one, the likelihood that those 300 houses are going to be at the price point that we really need them is pretty much slim to none. Because a developer's job, they're not bad people. Their job is to make money. So they're going to go to the place where it's most profitable for them to build. They're going to go places like, Church Hill or Bellevue or, parts of south of the river, and particularly if you give them the opportunity to take a lot and say, great, you can put two houses there rather than one house. They're not building two $300,000 houses. They're building two $600,000 houses. So.
So this is Elizabeth. I don't want to put words in Melissa's mouth, but it sounds like maybe we need to revisit some of the residential cottage standards beyond just manufactured housing, and put a little bit more, if I'm saying, because again, we're just a recommending body. We don't have any authority to require it to be put into the draft, but maybe the Zach's ask is to take another look at how the cottage designation is applied in the coming draft.
And then this is Andrew Bunn. So regarding affordable units, it seems like the 300 that we're talking about here as your example from RDC, that's including the preservation bonus. So a lot of those are like the only affordable housing we might see built, which is ADUs, like small units in the back of existing larger housing, the 1,000 square foot units that are being added here. So my understanding is that the relatively tiny increase, that like small 300 homes, only a portion of those are going to be those ADUs. We're talking a really, really tiny increase in what is already a tiny portion of the homes, which is the starter homes. But this is how we get those starter homes. So it seems like we would want to talk about like expanding ADU allowability, like by right ADUs. Those are the small homes.
So with ADUs, I think your issue is, well, there's a couple problems with these ADUs. First of all, you have to talk about financing. You cannot finance an ADU unless you happen to have like access to cash or a home equity line of credit. So all this talk about ADUs, if you're a developer and you want to build two houses plus an ADU, that's one thing. But like if you're talking about adding an ADU in Church Hill or Forest Hill, the people that are doing that are probably doing it either for themselves, maybe a kid and they have the money and they may be using it as a rental, but they may be using it as short-term rental. So, see a lot of that. Number two, I just think mechanically, there are a lot of questions about ADUs and particularly this idea of sublots, which I think is very interesting. But the only place I'm aware of that it's been done for any period of time is Oregon. And there are issues around it. And I think one of the other issues in Richmond that we don't talk about is the infrastructure. Like, how are you going to get sewer lines and power lines and water lines from the street in the front all the way to the back of your house?
You're gonna get, this is Maureen, so you're gonna get it there, you're just gonna have to pay for it.
A lot of money.
And so like, that's where it does become pretty expensive to do those things. So I mean, you really end up looking at, are there parcels where developers or someone can like gather some, and do they have the zoning to then be able to like make parcels that are small enough to drive down the cost? I mean, they're not necessarily gonna build a $600,000 house in Belmead. I mean, maybe you would see that might be more like 400, but that's still not your starter price, right? Which is, and I think those are economics that I don't know if we're going to be able to solve.
Right.
Like, if you have $250,000 and your choice is to live in a tiny cottage house in Richmond or like buy one in the suburbs, you might end up buying one in the suburbs.
Right.
I'm not saying, those are just facts. I'm not saying it's good or bad. But there's bigger economics at play that I don't think we're going to be able to solve just with the zoning ordinance.
And I agree with Maritza. I mean, I just also feel like sometimes there's a kind of, I don't know if it's a blind spot about the way both like real estate financing works and also real estate development. So, these are great ideas conceptually, but it's like, is this going to work on the ground? And I personally think the only way we get more starter homes is to have smaller lots with smaller houses.
Yeah.
Because it's square footage times price per square foot is how you get, I mean, it's just math.
Yeah, I agree also.
Thank you for explaining. That makes sense.
Sure.
Thank you for letting us pick your realtor brain.
Oh, yeah, anytime.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that because I've thought from the beginning of looking at code refresh, so much of it is based on unrealistic expectations and a lack of understanding of the market and all this sort of thing. But your idea of the starter homes, I think is important to explore. Are there not areas in the city where developers, or if necessary, maybe the city, but preferably developers, if it can be kept in that segment, can buy land and build these small starter homes? I mean, that's what was done right after World War II in particular. There were starter homes built in the West End, North Side, South Side, you name it. Is there land, do we know, is there land that can be either redeveloped, whatever it has on there now is not very desirable, or maybe it's vacant, and where we can start building starter homes all over again?
Yeah, I mean, most of it's south of the river. That's just the reality. It's going to be places like Belmead and Oak Grove and Swansboro and, up by McGuire Veterans. I mean, just the reality of economics is the north of the river land is more valuable for the most part than south of the river land. Some of that has to do also with the infrastructure piece, because some of that land that was part of the Chesterfield Annex doesn't have like good infrastructure. But, there are places, but you got to have developers want to go there.
And if I could I'm sorry, I just want to chime in. I love Melissa's, this is Melissa's explanation, but it's also a matter of, can developers get financing to go there as well?
Mhm.
So we got to be mindful that there's the bank that's determining whether or not they're going to lend to be able to make that product work. So I'm gonna throw that out there.
Yeah, I appreciate this conversation because it's helpful, and to answer, this is Preston Lloyd, Charlie's question as to sort of what's driving where home builders are buying. Land cost is a principal one, but also in constructing homes, there's an economy of scale at issue. Infill development is really challenging. While you can do custom homes on a one-off basis at the high end of the market, we're talking about a very different element of the market. Bricks and sticks cost the same, whether it's a big house or a small house. And so the land becomes the most important variable. The available land in the city that's at scale is in the portions of the city that came from Chesterfield. They don't have the infrastructure. The schools are overcrowded. And so there's a natural push-pull. When I go to the planning commission and try to entitle new housing in those parts of the city at a density that very often doesn't quite fit the Richmond 300 plan because it's bouncing up against the upper end, the objection that I get is, but do we have the infrastructure? And so that's where the land is though. And so that's where you can afford to build those housing. When you find infill lots elsewhere in the city, it's usually not large enough to be able to have the scale that any sophisticated home builder would take the risk on being able to acquire that and then deliver new housing.
This is Charlie. I mean, so why aren't we focusing on figuring out how we can expand the infrastructure in order to provide the housing that maybe will actually meet some of this demand? I mean, right now the city is spending a gazillion dollars. It's not a correct term exactly, but on infrastructure in my neighborhood, and I see all over the city, in utilities and repave, you name it. And it's primarily, I guess, federal funds left over from the Biden administration. But that money could be used, if there's more available, to put infrastructure in these areas we're talking about, where you could build affordable housing, build the starter homes.
This is Maritza. I would respond, Charlie, that the zoning ordinance doesn't focus on that infrastructure part. It just focuses on how we can use the land. And the master plan is basically the city saying, there's two things that we can use to guide growth. One is the zoning ordinance and one is the way the city spends its money on capital projects. So that's infrastructure, that's where transit goes, that's roads, that's where we build new schools, new community facilities. And so those two things are really supposed to happen, but they don't, they kind of have to respond to each other. So then every year, the planning commission reviews the DPW capital improvements budget before council does. And the reason they do that is that they are looking to see that the capital budget is in alignment with the master plan. And so those are two different tools, and they kind of like work like one step after the other. They can't always work like totally lockstep all the time. They're responding to each other.
But that's one of the biggest problems I've always had with the Code Refresh is you're trying to solve everything by zoning.
We can't.
You're right.
I'm not trying to solve anything.
Well, I mean, but it's promoted that way.
Yeah.
Okay, let's not talk over each other.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
This is
Preston, Melissa, then Charlie, I hear.
Preston Lloyd. I think we're all in agreement that it's a specific tool. It's not a panacea. And yet, if we're trying to allow development to occur, both where infrastructure exists or where we want it to exist, and to move the market in a way that's efficient and that responds to public policy goals that we have, this ordinance that we're working on is, in my opinion, the most powerful tool that we have to align those objectives. And so the best way we can do it is to limit regulatory burdens on the development that we want to occur by right in the places where it responds to a policy need, which is a lack of supply. And so I think that we can accomplish those goals both in terms of driving infill development, but also in focusing on what the Richmond 300 plan urged us to do, which is focus on nodes, focus on corridors, focus on the places in the city where we do have existing infrastructure. Now, that is also typically the most expensive land that we have in the city. And so you're not going to get a lot of ADUs or single family attached units in those areas. You can build density, which supports higher frequency transit. It'll have other benefits, but it's not a one size fits all. But I do think that is really the impetus of why we're putting so much time and energy into a document that we want to be able to respond to those policy objectives.
Melissa, did you have any comment?
Yeah, that just actually leads me to a kind of a comment / question then. Because one of the things that you just said is one size fits all. And you also said, focus on transportation corridors and nodes. And I guess my question in this entire process has always been, why isn't that what we're doing? Like, why are we focusing so much on, duplex plus ADU? And I know you have an answer.
No,
but
I'm smiling because that's how I feel. You'll see.
But because it seems to me, and maybe I just misunderstand because, I'm a real estate agent and a lawyer, I'm not a zoning person. But that if you focus the upzoning only on those areas, that would drive that development to those places, because that's where it makes it easiest, you know, the path of least resistance for developers. Am I wrong in
I don't
kind
know,
of?
if- I would say, this is Maritza, I would say, I'm not sure I would only focus on those areas because there is a little bit of, I'm looking at Charlie because I know he does a lot of SUPs in some single family areas. I think there's some tweaks around the edges that we need to do to single family to make it a little bit easier to do that spec housing that Preston referred to. But I think we should spend a little bit more of our energy on the corridors and thinking about how our zoning ordinance, this draft, will make it possible for developers to build housing and other buildings to support our city in a responsible manner, but like also in a financeable manner that makes sense. And I add that caveat because there's a lot of things in this ordinance, and I wrote all my comments to staff that will make it, there's so many more regulations that will make it longer for the zoning staff just to interpret what it says. It will require people to hire lots of more consultants. And that is on those corridors and nodes. So I think it will result in like people not being able to build the buildings that we need at the pace we want them to be built. And I'm not saying that means that we're going to build these crazy buildings that are really, no. Like we can do it nicely, but just like, this is a lot. This is a lot. You can see my sticky notes, all of my words. It's a lot. It's a lot more than what we have now.
This is Elizabeth. Charlie, I know that you had a comment, and Mary Ann, maybe because we don't have anyone on the ZAC that's doing development at this infill scale and can speak to why that's the cost that it is. Maybe if there's questions we want to put together and ask a member of the development community to respond to, that may be helpful. I know Maritza, I know that you do development, but you do, yeah, and Brian is more multifamily, but we don't have anyone that can speak to this smaller scale infill to maybe to respond to some of this.
Charlie might be able to, because he works with a lot of them, but
You work for a lot of them, but you're not an actual developer.
I observe their behavior.
Yeah.
And we evaluate them as a neighborhood association and have done probably more infill development than anywhere in the city in terms of projects. So,
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Wilson, you know, to the point of encouraging the generation of starter homes, if we're looking at the current zoning ordinance, it certainly doesn't do that either, right? So something's got to give, and whether this guarantees, right now, we don't have anything like a unit size maximum for like a single family dwelling. Like we don't have that right now, but who's to say we don't in the future? I'm not sure, but you know, aforementioned Oak Grove and Bellmead currently zoned R5, even though a lot of those original lots are 25 feet dating back to their original platting in the 1920s. And it was, you could say it was predatorily zoned to prevent that scale of development going forward due to, you know, previous issues in Richmond, policy-wise, racism, et cetera, like economic depression intentionally. And to think that it's not a viable thing to do to convert it to something that's more appropriate, RD5, RDC today, just seems like almost as if it's the least we could do, right? And that's kind of where I see it. I think it's not a bad idea also to consider maybe bonuses or something that allow for slightly more density if you're willing to do smaller units that are detached and also for sale, et cetera. Like, and we're still, it's a living document right now. We're still working on it, right? I think it's something that's worthy of discussion, but I don't think this is an either or thing. And I certainly don't think we should look at our current zoning as like good.
This is Elizabeth. This has been excellent conversation. We have about 10 minutes left before we jump into tree canopy and sustainability. Are there any other last questions? Mary Ann, I don't want to put you on the spot. If there's anything that you wanted to respond to, or the consultants, I don't want that to be overlooked. I don't see you jumping up and down, so, okay.
I appreciate the conversation of talking about the corridors.
For those online, the Mary Ann Pitts commented she appreciates the comments about focusing on corridors and nodes. Make sure everyone heard that. Any other folks from the Zach, Riley?
A little bit different. This is Riley Champagne speaking, and once again, just like impressed by the level of conversation here. I'm, barely keeping up because this is not my field, so maybe I'll take it upon myself to sound a bit like naive and rude. But essentially, my question kind of boils down to like going back to the presentation about hypothetical values and, oh, a developer might want to go this much over because they see this hypothetical scenario where they can subdivide. I am someone who wants to see more infill development, more housing, but also I've got this little voice in the back of my head that now pays property taxes. Is there like a weird thing where this is going to drive up assessments because of this hypothetical, regardless of whether it happens or not? And like, I'm not asking that to be like, I only care about taxes, but like, is there research on that? Is there precedent on that? Like, I want to see stuff get built. I want to see starter homes. I want to see more people in Richmond. But like, what can that be modeled at all? How does that factor in? Yeah, and I hear that and I feel that.
This is Melissa Savinko. I think if you go just onto Google or ChatGPT and search for academic studies related to land values, in areas where there's been upzoning, I think the academic research is pretty clear that yes, it does drive land values. It's going to drive land values in the places where the development actually happens. Just because you upzone everything doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get property values increase everywhere. But I mean, I'm happy to hear from the other land use people if they think I'm wrong on that. But that's my understanding that yes, for the most part, it will absolutely. And that's part of the reason I think, and I don't know if I'm saying something I'm not supposed to say, I think that's part of the reason we're doing this, right? Is more money for the city.
Mary Ann, did you have a comment on the property value component?
I did have a conversation with the assessor's office and asked similar to what Melissa's saying. It doesn't automatically result in increase in property values or increase in assessments. As the market changes, as development actually occurs, that's when it could make properties more valuable at that point. And it doesn't immediately, we're changing our zoning, doesn't mean that your property is more valuable because now the potential is there. That's not what increases there.
And it's sort of like, this is Maritza, it's sort of like you're in a neighborhood, you want your property value to go up so that you can sell it for more than you bought it, right? But
I'm going to stay in my house,
but
so.
you also want to finish the house. Like, there's like, it's like, there's a plus minus there, right?
Yeah.
And it's not, if the house across the street from you sells for more than what you bought yours on a square foot basis, then like, yeah, your house should be worth more and the city should document that accordingly.
Andrew and Melissa.
Having done a bit of research on anti-displacement measures as well, my understanding is that most things that try to prevent displacement through tax value increases are outside of zoning code. They mostly have to do with the way that we do assessments, the way that we tax properties when we decide to increase and how we decide that value increase. So there are things that you can do within a zoning code to prevent that, but most of them are policies that lie outside it, is my understanding.
I was just gonna ditto.
So this is Elizabeth. We're winding down our time on this topic. Again, we're just an advising body, but if there is, some food for thought / future recommendations that we want to relay to staff. I mean, I'm hearing residential cottages, more focus on nodes and corridors. I think that's what I've been capturing out of this. Very little return in some of these areas around the single family ADUs discussions. So if there's things that you want staff to take back and to be considering as they're working on draft 3, there's been a lot of messaging here, but if there's more specifics, please speak up or send those comments over to Mary Ann. Hopefully we can get some more analysis as asked on these market scenarios. But with that, is there anything else as we move on to sustainability and tree canopy? Great. Kyle, Colin, are you good as we part?
I am.
We're good.
Excellent. Marianne, any remarks before we move over to sustainability? Okay. Is Tara here?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Welcome.
Everyone, my name is Tara Worden. I'm the Sustainability Manager at Sustainability. Thank you for having me here today to talk about this. I was able to watch your previous conversation, so I sort of shaped my presentation around some of the questions and comments that came up. But I'll keep it brief so we can allow for plenty of time at the end of the presentation to make sure everything is clear. Okay. Yeah. So just to review, trees do a lot for us. They're not just amenities or decoration, sort of function in part as public infrastructure. So in terms of public health, residents of tree-lined streets and neighborhoods show measurably lower rates of cardiovascular disease, respiratory illnesses, stress, and depression. Access to canopy is a health equity issue, and neighborhoods with least the lower canopy numbers are disproportionately lower income and communities of color. There's heat island reduction impacts. Urban tree canopies can lower surface temperatures from 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. Trees reduce urban temperatures by shading roads, parking lots, sidewalks, and rooftops, and directly reduce homeowners' energy costs by shading roofs. Stormwater management. So time and time again, we document trees as one of the #1 tools to reduce stormwater pollution. According to the U.S. Forest Service, tree roots absorb over 1,300 gallons of stormwater per mature tree per year. Richmond's urban tree canopy just last year is estimated to reduce 270 million gallons of stormwater runoff. So when we think of CSO events or sort of the conversation around infrastructure not being sufficient, trees play a big part in that, the stormwater runoff conversation. Air quality, we know trees clean air. They also provide a really healthy habitat for birds and insects. And then property value. So I know we just had a really robust conversation around the property assessments and sort of the development potential and the impact of that on property values. So trees also play a part in that. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation references that properties can increase between 5 and 18% with robust mature tree canopies on site. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of a frame of what we're working with right now in Richmond's, our current urban tree canopy assessment is the most recent one was done in 2021. The Urban Forest Master Plan is currently under development with our urban forestry team. But it cites a 32% canopy coverage citywide. That's down from 42% just 7 years prior. So in the past the study says 7 years, 2014 to 2021, we lost a net of almost 200 acres of trees. And then our goals that are outlined in Richmond 300 cite a 60% tree canopy coverage average across the city, with no less, the sort of least coverage in a neighborhood should be around 30%. We know that we can't meet that goal with just street trees or park trees and parks. So there's a reliance on the private sector and private development to carry that goal alongside in the development standards. Yes, let's go to the next slide where so tree canopy minimum standards are not new. About 9 other localities in the state of Virginia have had this. This is a list of just our research in the Office of Sustainability. So just up the road in Ashland, they've had it for quite some time. Many localities in Northern Virginia have had an exemption. They're called like a non-attainment air quality area. So Planning District 8 has been allowed by the General Assembly for a long time to have tree canopy minimums on site. Richmond has actually had the ability to opt into this for quite some time, but just recently the GA approved a tree canopy fund. So that structure is now sort of the framework with which we are pursuing in the development standards that you see laid out in Code Refresh. And these standards are kind of very similar to what we have suggested for the canopy minimums in different residential and commercial zone parcels. Next slide, please. I just wanted to call out a couple of things that we learned through our research. Falls Church has really been a standard bearer for the direction that we'd like to see the policy go. You can see that they have a 20% minimum residential standard, but they have what they call the T zone or transition zone. It is a 10% standard. And then just recently in January of this year, they put on site commercial standards for 10%. And what they grappled with, and I think what I heard in the conversation last month was this consideration of allowing for on-site canopy requirements to be met by street trees adjacent to the property. That's a consideration that our office has made, and just learning from our colleagues in Falls Church that there's not really considerable increase or enhancements made to tree canopy standards or tree canopy at large when you're using street trees to accommodate that on-site requirement. And then in Charlottesville, they've had tree canopy minimums in place since 1990. Well, they've just updated them with the new development code and similar sort of standards across different zoned parcels as what's presented in the code refresh as it stands right now. But the question around enforcement has been a thing that we've kind of grappled with. And how do you make sure that trees planted during development live to that 20-year maturation point? So there are staff capacity questions around our urban forestry team. I know the tree commission in Charlottesville just suggested that they hired another urban forester to do that code compliance check. They also implemented a tree removal permit program. So if you are a private landowner and you need to pull down a tree, that is healthy. You have to go through a city permit process to remove that tree. If it is a tree that is ill and unwell, you can remove that without going through a permit process. Next slide. And this was a really interesting study that was recently done, or not too recent. Virginia Tech studied Fairfax County's tree minimums to see what the impact was after essentially the first decade of them being in place from 2009 to 21. And what I think they found was that this the development groups, they were able to actually very easily meet the on-site requirements. And in fact, they exceeded those requirements by 16% at that 10-year check-in point, because in Fairfax County, they don't have a 20-year timeline. They're working with a 10-year timeline. So I think there was questions around like, this is going to be a bit of a big burden on the development community, and it's going to limit the impact or limit the ability for us to meet our housing goals. And in Fairfax County, that has proven not to be the case. 80% of their development parcels, which was like over 7,000 parcels that they looked at through the study, were able to meet those development standards. And only 20% of those use this sort of hardship avenue by paying into the tree canopy fund, which they call it tree preservation and planting fund. Next slide, please. So this is just a basic outline of what the state code allows. You can see 20% in a low density residential. They measure it on an acreage basis. So translating acres to our code was a little different because we don't have minimum lot sizes. So we made some guesses in trying to track this. 15 for medium residential, and then a 10% commercial, industrial, high density residential with a 20-year check-in timeframe. And if you, next slide, this just compares what is currently in the code refresh drafts development standards. it tracks. Then we also have a preservation incentive. So if a developer preserves any on-site tree canopy, they can actually meet that canopy requirement at a lesser coverage, essentially. But I mean, we went back and forth about sort of what zones should fall into these different percentage requirements. And so you'll notice that it's RDA and RDB are 20 and 15%, and then everything else, RDC, commercial, mixed use, everything is within this sort of 10%. And 10% is sort of the lowest standard that I think we want to get to. Next slide, please. And so these are just some details about the different aspects of the policy approach. Preservation incentive details. So to qualify for this preservation incentive, I know there was some conversation around, oh, you have to have an ISA certified arborist come out and make a detailed preservation plan. Most landscape professionals are ISA certified arborists. So there's a long list of them that are local that Virginia Tech, the sort of cooperative extension office, provides to anybody that looks on the internet. It's very easy to find, but I will just go through this quickly. Is that to qualify, it has to be a healthy tree, 6 inches. What is DBH? It's diameter breast height. So basically like a tree that is about that big at this height, that qualifies to be preserved on site. It can't just be like a spindly little baby tree. The tree conservation plan, like I said, has to be approved by an ISA certified arborist. And if there's a gap in the existing tree and the sort of requirement has to be met by planting new trees. And then the in lieu fee is the tree canopy bank, which is sort of this new feature that the state allows. You have to, in order to qualify for this hardship, you have to document that there's restriction in the development intensity on site, where you may not be able to build to the largest sort of box that you otherwise would be able to. My eyes are weak. Option to preserve existing tree. Oh yeah, so you have to kind of exhaust all of your resources, whether it's building to the fullest capacity, preserving on-site trees, and then consideration of construction activities on-site that would impact existing trees. If there are one or more of these are met, then you can use this tree banking option to meet the development standards that's set as a minimum. Next slide, please. So these are sort of 6 components of the policy approach that we helped do some research around and provided to the planning department as they were drafting the development standards. So define and credit the tree canopy precisely. You'll see that, and I think there's probably conversation around this. We opted not to consider those street trees as a part of the on-site canopy requirements as a minimum standard, because that we want to build out our robust tree canopy. There's lots of benefits to having trees. There's lots of benefits to both the city, public and private, all parties involved. The reference text in the ordinance, it's highlighted in the draft code right now. We're working with our urban forester to basically put a menu together. All these cities that already have this, they have a menu that says this tree grows to this width in diameter by 20 years. So essentially when a project is coming in through site plan review, they can say, I want this tree, this tree, this tree. This is the square footage total. This is 20% of the full lot in square foot. So it is less of a site plan component. It is just a menu selection of, we're going to plant these trees, and this is how big we expect it to grow in 20 years. Establish a tree canopy plan. I kind of went through that. There's an invasive list that we could say you cannot plant. So some of these trees we know are really problematic to our ecosystem. And then, oh yeah, we've built in the trees preservation bonus and plan for enforcement. So that's something that we're continuing to think about with our urban forestry team. Next slide. I think that's the end. So I welcome questions and conversation. I'm here to assist in anything that I can. Sure.
I've got one. Thank you. This is very good. And I'm not studied this, but a couple of slides ago, you had the requirements for being able to take advantage of that one, this fee canopy exception. Number one strikes me as the exception that could swallow the whole thing. Essentially, you'd be able to say, well, we can tear down existing trees if we can't build to the maximum, otherwise permitted. I would think that the reason for a policy is to preserve canopy, not to allow the canopy to be destroyed just because it doesn't allow maximum construction. Can you comment on that?
I think, so we've gone back and forth around the sort of minimum building foot or maximum building footprint. Is that the right phrase or no? The lot coverage. Thank you. So there, I think it's 80% in some of these zones. We know tree canopies grow up. The tree actual footprint is sort of minimal, though it does need some space for its roots. It's kind of the best case scenario that we can actually get to under the General Assembly's current restrictions for what we can ask for.
This is state law. This is state law.
Yeah, so we obviously we can't do anything that the state doesn't allow us to, so this is where we are. Yes, Mr. Bunn.
So this is Andrew Bunn. What I'm kind of getting from this is this seems like a really good opportunity for the zoning code to defer to what seems to be almost universal consensus on best practices. If 9 cities across the state, none of which are Richmond is not particularly unique from any of these. They represent a strong cross-section of cities across the state. There's a river city. There's cities that are sort of in rural areas. There's the more urban North Nova cities. Like those cities represent a clean cross-section of cities in Virginia, and they've all had pretty much these exact things in place, policies in place for like 10 to 20 years in some of their cases. This doesn't seem like we're doing anything particularly new, and it seems like they've all been really thoroughly studied and that it has largely worked. So I would really strongly recommend that we proceed with the best practices here. It seems like experts agree.
I think Preston has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Tree preservation is obviously a legitimate policy goal, but I do think that we need to be candid that Northern Virginia current ordinances are not low impact on the development community, even if they're being met. And these regulations impose real design constraints, costs, and they present a lot of entitlement risk, especially when they conflict with other land use and housing policy goals. Specifically, we're adding substantial costs to develop new housing with a burden that's going to fall on the development community. And so I don't think it's a question of whether trees matter. Certainly, I think we would all agree that having reducing heat island effects and prioritizing forestry is going to be a universally acclaimed priority. But I think we have to be candid about those trade-offs in the communities and specifically how developers are prepared to absorb some of those costs. Because I do think that there are some distinguishing characteristics between some of the jurisdictions that were named. When we look at Fairfax as the principal example that was given, preservation is a lot easier in areas where large lot subdivisions were being proposed and you have existing forested areas that are also going to be credited under those ordinances. But when you have transit-oriented development, redevelopment of aging commercial corridors, and other infill areas and opportunities that we as a group have prioritized, the cost of reforesting that becomes much more considerable and it's a constraint. So I'm not against the ordinance, but I'm uncomfortable with the inference that this is an easy regulation to impose. I think that we need to be eyes wide open about the burden that it's going to create and make sure that that's an appropriate trade-off.
Could I just respond quickly to the burden? So the tree bank option is that hardship path that developers can take if on-site requirements cannot be met. And trees are regulated, the cost of that tree bank is already regulated through the state code. So it has to be the typical nursery cost of a 2-inch EVH caliber tree. So those are.
Is it your assertion
around, like,
that that doesn't impose any new cost on an existing developer?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying there are obviously costs to developing in Richmond.
And I guess that's my point, is that this is a regulation that will impose a cost on the redevelopment of existing land that's being redeveloped for potentially new housing. And when you add costs, it makes the affordability objective that we have that much more challenging.
Right.
And so that's, when I speak to policy trade-offs, I think we need to be eyes wide open about it.
I would argue that it's an upfront cost for a long-term benefit over the course of at least 20 years.
Charlie.
I do not expect you to know the answer to this question, but to meet the goal, how many canopy trees do we need to plant?
That's a great question. And Charlottesville just did this analysis. So they said if they planted a minimum of 3,600 trees per year in city right of way, they would still not meet their 45% goal. So we are at 32% to meet our 60% goal. We are currently nowhere near. So I can't really do that quick math, but just to give you some numbers, that's what.
Walking through, if you'll indulge a thought exercise. Totally different approach. And I would think that there's a way to get to the intent of this, which is to plant more trees in the city, to some extent on private land, right? I have spent a fair bit of money on my property, dug plenty of holes to plant native trees on my property. So let's give a round of applause. With that, like, if you're thinking of added costs of enforcement, like, are you all hiring more reviewers? Is zoning hiring work? Like, however that works, right? There are costs to implementing the program just from a policy perspective, right? What if we like paid homeowners to plant specific trees and then trees get planted? Like, that's a totally crazy idea, right? But the reason I wonder that is because the development community, while we're, very important people naturally, we're only going to have like a small view of land, right? Not every single property in the entire city is going to be redeveloped in the next 20 years, right? So like, I don't know, if someone said, hey, we'll give you $200 to plant this tree that cost you $50 and 3 hours to plant. I think a lot of people would do that. And I'm totally spitballing here. I don't know how that would work. You probably have to sign a waiver, right? But I get the goal. I'm very concerned about the goal. I just wonder if this is truly the way to do it, regardless of its like intent and merit. So.
Can I just plug real quick? You may or may not have heard of Cool the City, which is an initiative that's run through a coalition of community-based organizations, largely focused on the South Side. The city, my office received $6 million from USDA last 2 years ago. We are about halfway through a 5-year grant. We've planted over 5,000 trees. We give away trees every planting season. So if there are people that are interested in trees.
There's a free tree giveaway on the 25th.
But are people more likely to do something if they get paid? I think the answer is always.
Well, you actually get a $25 gift certificate to go to Lowe's to get your planting supplies.
You do see my point though.
Yeah. So I think it's a multiple policy approach, is that we're doing programs and running through the city to plant trees. This is a policy approach to sort of, meet the same goal.
Jennifer, one on Maritza and then Jennifer.
So I have 2 points because I would be curious to see on Virginia Tech's study if the study in Fairfax County, did they also do in some programs like you've mentioned, in addition to having the tree canopy study, and were they able to isolate which one produced the increase, an increase in tree canopy? Like which one was more effective?
Yeah.
It's like, just because they both have, doesn't mean, anyway. I took my own property, which would be RDB, and applied the same requirements. I just did the math again. I did it quickly in the meeting last time, but I would be about 60 square feet away from my requirement. And like that includes like we planted an oak on the corner of our property. So I would still be shy, and we planted 2 trees, probably because one of the trees we planted is a Japanese maple, which is lovely for a front yard, but doesn't have a big canopy, right? So like, and then the oak is at the corner of my prop. So basically I would not meet it, and we planted trees, and we don't want to put more trees in our backyard because we have a son who likes to throw footballs, and we don't want trees. So I wouldn't meet it, which is a little like, okay, how do we do this then? And then this my oak is at the corner of my property because I don't want it near my house for understandable reasons. So its canopy falls on property that is not mine. Would I be able to count all of the canopy, or would I only count the corner that's on my property?
No, it would be any tree that's, because again, it's not like you need to lay this tree out on a site plan. It is, you planted an oak in 20 years, that canopy is going to be massive, and it's likely going to take up a lot more than 20% of your lot coverage.
But it wouldn't be my lot, so.
Or a lot, it's like spans the lot.
Yeah.
But if the tree is on your property, it's
on my
like how it counts
So the
for.
But for the
Yeah.
canopy, even though it's like over here.
Yeah.
That's
And
what I
if my
think I'm
neighbor
hearing.
in the future like hates it and wants me to like take down branches because they might be falling on their roof, I would like lose my.
Well, that comes back to the question of enforcement, which I think is a good, it's a sticky situation. And like you asked about additional staffing. This is likely going to be something that we only have 2 people in the urban forestry, like that work from a sort of planning perspective. So, they might have to have another person in the department.
It's Jennifer Mullen. I just had a question on the payment in lieu. What is your department's plan for those funds? Is it, if you're not gonna meet your 60% only on public property, how does that work, particularly given that we have a lot of the city that is already developed and it's very different than Loudoun County?
Yes, yeah. So great question. The state code sets up specifically that the city can either use those funds to plant trees in areas where urban canopy is lacking. So sort of red line neighborhoods where there's a lot of urban heat islands, or you can disperse those funds to CBOs that do tree plantings as their like bread and butter. So because we have this coalition of partners through the Cool the City grant, they do tree plantings every planting season. So there's a real like already built pipeline for those funds to be distributed to our CBO partners that do community plantings in the right of way, in parks. So the sort of infrastructure is almost already there. We just have to set up a special fund to receive those dollars and then disperse them. There's an administrative element to it, I guess.
I guess just a couple of follow-up questions. Is the plan that you are working on now identifying the locations where those would be? And then do you have an agreement with those CBOs on enforcement also? I mean, you city give me money to do something.
Yeah. There's definitely ways to keep that stuff held transparent from the purposes of, public dollars being created. But the plan, so there is an urban forest master plan. We're calling it the Richmond Tree Plan, city's first ever. That we've done a ton of data analysis to show where there are significant gaps in the tree canopy.
In the public
right of way.
Okay.
Yes. And that is where those tree plantings are. Well, currently through Cool the City, they have to be used in the public right of way, in some private homes during the tree giveaways. Sorry, I'm getting too far into that program, but there's a great website about it if you're interested. But the urban forest master plan would identify places, types of trees, all of the details that I think would be complementary to this policy approach.
Billy Gates. I just was wondering, is there some way that you could incorporate maybe the Richmond Public Schools, maybe elementary, maybe up to middle school kids, so they can know the significance and importance of trees, because they're our future, and a lot of times they don't seem like they know a lot of things because I don't know who's teaching them or they're not being taught things and things that I think kids should know they don't know now that they taught us when we were growing up. So even just simple stuff like we had home economics, we had to learn how to set the table, you had to cook, sew, iron, just whatever, just normal skills just in case you become an adult, So I'm just wondering if there's some way they can incorporate maybe RPS
Yeah,
since
that's
it's
a
the
great,
city.
great point. Again, not to,
Because children get excited about stuff, like this.
yeah,
And they would be really, if you could teach them and they help plant the trees and they really take on later on teaching and preserving trees and being more conservative.
yeah, that is part of the Pool the City approach. There's a workforce development verification process alongside education and learning how to plant trees, take care of trees. Thank you.
Yeah, on the second slide, you said that the canopy from 2021 to 14 dropped from 42 to 31% or something like that. Two-part question. How did that happen? What was that 200 acres of canopy loss? And secondly, has the city turned it around with these programs that you've described, or are we still losing canopy?
We are, well, so there's a current LiDAR assessment that our city just finished, that results can be published in early fall. So we'll know better sense of which direction we're headed. The 2021 data is the most recent, so we only have that 2014 and 2021 sort of data points, and it does show downward decline. And if we track development a lot from since 2021, the likelihood is that we're going to continue to see a canopy loss. If you can go, actually threw in some extra slides because I anticipated this question towards the back. Yeah, so this is a snapshot from ChesapeakeTrees.net, maybe, I'm not sure, but they did this analysis and it shows this is specific to Richmond, our net gains, our gains and our losses. So you can see this darker red is 99 acres lost to turf or pervious surfaces. So that still means that stormwater is infiltrating the ground. But 228 acres were lost to impervious surfaces. So that's buildings, that's cement, concrete, asphalt, sidewalks, etc. And so in terms of the net loss, was nearly 200 acres. But you can see this is kind of where the losses and gains. And then the next slide is the hexagonal map. This portion of the river is not calculated in that. So the majority of areas where we're losing tree canopy is also on the south side. So that is a concern. So we want to,
Yeah, so to follow up, so are you counting pervious, impervious as being loss of tree canopy, or are we just I thought we were talking about trees and tree canopies, but it looks like that slide is also counting in that 200 acres or whatever it was lost. Is that?
This is trees
Hey.
lost, and then whether or not those acreages were covered by pervious surfaces, which is this darker red, and then the lighter orange is where buildings or impervious surfaces replaced trees.
Okay, so it's both surface and canopy is being.
Well, this is 327 acres were lost in terms of total tree canopy. Then we gained 128 acres of canopy. So the offset is around that 200 mark.
This is Charlie. Can you go to that map really quick again, the heat map? So this is interesting for me as the purpose of putting this in the zoning ordinance is correlating tree canopy with coverage, right? And looking at this, it's like not a scientific, I'm sure this was rooted in some projection in GIS, but this isn't
I didn't make this map, so I don't have all the answers to it.
So I get it, but yeah, a lot of this occurring in Southside at that broad of a scale, to associate those losses with development, I'm not sure. Like the fourth district, not a ton of to me, I don't think, oh wow, the fourth district, the south of the river western part of the city. When I think about that, like, I don't think,
I
Yeah,
thought the
it-
same
right.
thing. and
So
it's like-
how is that?
It's a,
Yeah.
it's a net loss. So because it's already more wooded, any drop is gonna show a bit more of a significant loss.
It's a trend map then.
Yeah, but I mean,
It could
It's a
be,
little, it's a
right.
little misleading.
yeah, so it's, I can all right, I just wanted to point
It's-
that out, I guess, because it's,
This is not this is not the canopy gap map. This is where we are losing trees.
Got it.
okay,
Yeah, so this is this shows something different.
okay, thank you.
I have a question. This is Elizabeth. I feel like I need to defend that I'm very supportive of trees. Like Marisa, I have planted 4 on my property in the 7 years that I've lived there. But that has come at a cost because I've had to water them, maintain them. I have a neighbor that hates that they come over her fence, so I have to have them trimmed each year. There's a cost that I'm willing to bear. So let's put aside that there's an upfront cost to the developer that will go to the homeowner. Who's going to help potential homeowners nurture these trees, make sure that they grow, they're watered? What if they're in commercial areas? There was a time where there was trees planted in all sorts of commercial areas and they were dying because there was no one there to water them and nurture them to where they could become right canopy. So also, to Charlie's point about enforcement, am I in violation of my zoning ordinance if I don't maintain those new trees that are planted on my property? So I want to be mindful of trees are incredibly important. Put them again at 4 because I see the importance of them and I want them there. But I think that comes at a cost and a maintenance responsibility that the city is going to have to be responsible for, particularly in some commercial areas. And what's going to happen to the homeowner that maybe can't or doesn't want to take care of it? Are they in violation of a zoning ordinance? Just want to be mindful of some of the private property rights here.
It's interesting to add something. So my mom has been in the house for 35 years now. And she's
Lenny,
lost for.
sorry to interrupt.
I'm
Can you
sorry.
speak up so that, no.
Benny Gates.
Could you just speak up because some of our audience can't hear you?
I am.
Thank you.
My mom has been in her house for 35 years and she's lost 4 trees because of hurricanes. Every tree she's lost is because a hurricane came and it kind of was leaning over and about to fall, so we had to cut them down. But they weren't replaced. And now around the house, it is hot. You can notice the difference when you come over there. But she likes the hot. She's 84 now, so she doesn't mind that her whole house is hot. But as to your point, for the common good of the people, it's not good that she's lost 4 trees. Absolutely not good. But she doesn't, I don't want to say she doesn't care, but I don't think she does. She feeds the birds, but the birds don't have the trees. They're in the neighbor's trees now, and they come over to eat in our yard and then go back in the trees beside us. So it's really interesting how the animals and the squirrels and everything, they get excited that they have food and they eat my cat food. Whatever the cat doesn't eat, it's gone in the morning. Something's eating it, raccoons, I don't know. But it's just I feel bad. I would love to plant more trees, but it's expensive. It comes at a cost, like you said. And I don't know what to do because the hurricanes took them down. It's not like we ever wanted to cut the trees down. We had to. They were all leaning after the hurricanes over the years. So. Yeah.
I guess this is more of a comment, but I think maybe going back to what Preston said, I do think this is one area, and also going back to what Director Vonk said at some point, where he wanted us to focus on what are the things that we care about most. I would put this high up on the list, particularly as a burden that the development community should have to look at, because they are the community that generally disturbs the most land at once in places. And maybe there are little tweaks to this, but I really like the idea of creating a better mechanism for funding urban forestry, because if I can recall one thing from my work with the Richmond Tree Stewards, when the actual urban foresters of the city came, they just said that they don't have enough people to do this right. And so that was the biggest thing. So maybe, again, in terms of, what are we focusing on with zoning? It's like, okay, not a panacea. This is probably one area where it's like more funding for urban forestry, more urban foresters out there planting trees for people, identifying the places where, because it drives me crazy sometimes when I'm ride my bike and I go, this is the spot where if someone planted a tree right here, it would shade this whole intersection. It would be beautiful. But the zoning code is probably not going to make that happen. So I would advocate for the mechanism that does maybe put a little burden on the developer disturbing a big pot of land to help fund urban forestry in the city.
Charlie Wilson. We do also need to be mindful of equating developer with capital D to like just people who live here and do stuff, right? So like the people who put a addition on their house and they like, is this going to trigger? We asked those questions last time, and I think draft 3 we might get a clearer answer on that. But this isn't like a only applicable to developers thing. This isn't applicable to everybody thing, and that's kind of where I was getting at last meeting, where I asked like, okay, like what are we really trying to accomplish, and does it need to be this complicated? If there are simpler ways of getting to that same goal, whether it's the curveball I just threw, like let's just pay people a bunch of money, whether it's that, or even just simplifying it, like if you're doing this, plant a tree, here's the list, go do it, send us a picture, and we'll final out your inspection. Like that, if something's in there that required planting of trees, I just wanted to feel easy, right? And as written, I'm concerned it doesn't feel easy, even if it is applicable to like how the enabling legislation is written. I'm not an enemy of the idea at all. I just really wanted to, if it's in there, I wanted to work and not feel like yet another thing that frustrates a citizen or adds cost to a developer. So,
Yeah, Charlie, to your point, we made this point before, but the applicability of the standards doesn't, the table in section 4.11 does not list when you would have to comply with the tree canopy. Right. So that was an edit we found.
We're nearing the end of our time. I appreciate, don't leave yet, because I want to make sure that there's no more questions. This was an excellent presentation, and thank you for bearing with us with all the questions. I think we all can agree that trees are important. Certainly don't want to leave you with that. I just want to make sure that we're crafting the regulation and the ordinance properly. Are any other comments or questions for our guests?
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you have any other thoughts or concepts, questions.
Thank you. Before we wrap up, are there any other comments or anything that you want to leave staff in advance of our meeting?
Do we know when we're going to get a draft 3 or is that just?
What's next?
Timeline.
Yeah. So I'm not going to speak to the draft 3. I'll let Mary Ann respond to that. But in terms of timeline, Maritza and Philip, we are going to, at the next meeting, get a timeline of what's expected of the ZAC going forward and what's left on the agenda and the time left of meeting. So we should see that in May, correct? Okay. Now, hold on, Mr. D. And then as far as draft 3, can you respond to that?
Draft 3 should be coming May-ish. We don't have specific dates for draft 3 yet. That's a goal.
Benny?
I was just gonna ask you actually, how much of a commitment was it to plant these trees? I feel bad now. I feel like I could be doing some trees. We're supposed to be getting landscaping done. I'm serious. We're supposed to be getting some landscaping done. I was gonna get like the bushes in the front and maybe some flowers planted, but maybe I can get him to try to help you with at least 1 or 2 trees because I actually miss the trees myself.
Yeah, I mean,
There's a free giveaway, and if you plant a native,
It is on Saturday, April 25th.
Okay.
Between 10 and 2.
Okay.
At Liberation Church.
I know where it's at.
5150 Midlothian
Yeah,
Terminal.
it's down, it's near my house.
like you'd be surprised. Like my mother-in-law has planted several natives, like red buds or whatever, and like they grow like fast. Like
no, I know.
I mean, it's kind of astonishing. Our maple is twice the height of me now, or our oak rather, and we planted it 6 years ago. So, and it was like a baby. So.
Yeah, I feel bad. Ollie's plant too.
I appreciate that. Melissa, if it's not too much trouble, could you share that with Mary Ann? And Mary Ann, if you could share the free with the rest of the ZAC. So Benny, you'll have the details.
I would be happy to something goes. Thank you, Chris.
Are there any other questions? Okay, well, just remind you that the next meeting here is May 13th, 4 p.m. in the Ed conference room at City Hall. And with that, we are adjourned.